Welcome back to this video on the IA. In the last video, I gave an overview of the whole IA process. Now we're going to jump into actually getting it off the ground. And the place we start with that is what I call the launch document. Let me first start by showing you the actual launch document. The aim of this video, or several series of videos, I don't know how I'm going to break it up in the end, is to go through this document here, right? And it has several tasks. Part one is called Discovery, and we have one task here. Now, the version of this document you might be seeing could be different, right? I might change it from recording this video, but I assume they'll just be minor changes. First part is just getting your solution approved, then meeting your client. Next, meeting your advisor, creating a front-end design. Then part three, validating, so meeting with your client again, filling out all this stuff. Ooh. Compiling your criterion A, and setting up your development environment. Okay, so these are all things that we will achieve within this first document, this first sprint, actually. Kind of a starting launch sprint, right? Okay, along the process, we're going to be needing different knowledge and skills, and some of those skills are within the IB curriculum. Here they are, and so that makes this doubly useful, because not only are you preparing your IA, but you are also being introduced to some of the information you're going to need for your actual IB exam. Okay, so part one, discovery. This is where we are going to be determining what is the thing we are even building. The first task is to get your proposal approved. So for your IA, you'll need to find a problem that needs to be solved using algorithmic thinking. And what this means in practice is that you'll have to find a client who has a problem that can be solved by algorithmic thinking. So in fact, you're looking for a problem, but the way you find that problem is finding a client who has such a problem. So first question I get is, where do I look for a client? Family or members of your community. So any parent, aunt or uncle, cousins, siblings, right? Members of your religious group, a family friend, a former camp counselor, could be right? Anyone like that. The next person is a member of your school community. So a teacher, coach, a staff member, a student leader. So a club, someone who runs a club or is in student government, something like that. Yeah, they might have a legitimate need. And of course, a friend. Okay, finally, you can be your own client. This is generally the last resort, and when students come to me saying, I'd like to be my own client right from the get-go, I say, stop, first try to find another client. The reason for this is simple. My experience has shown me that more often than not, when a student says they want to be their own client, they don't really have a need. They create a need. Starting from that point, as the IA develops and the need to expand it, the student doesn't think about the actual problem to be solved, but really the priority is to do as little work in the IA as possible. So the result is those projects tend to be the weakest. That's not always the case, of course, but that's the general trend, is that the whole reason a student picks themselves from the get-go is, ooh, how can I get by with doing as little work as possible, right? This is a challenge, and this is a challenge that you should really embrace fully to try to learn as much as you can from it. So, what makes a good problem then, right? You know the kind of person you can have as a client. What makes a good problem? So just about anything, really. A good problem, though, is something that when you're building it, when you're coding it, you're building a system. Now, what is a system? This is actually probably one of the first lessons you're going to have if you haven't in the IB curriculum. systems thinking, right? That's kind of point one in our syllabus. A system is something that takes in an input, right, as it is here, takes an input in, does some kind of processing, and gives an output. Okay, so a good IA is a solution that does this. Input, the client puts in something, enters some kind of data, the system processes it, and then spits out output. Okay, so if they have different ideas here, if we're talking about some database where the client is running a store, for example, they can type in all their inventory and the computer system processes it and displays it to the customer in a nice format, right? What the client sees, right, and then the end user of the system sees can be two very different things, and that's on purpose, right? That's what the system's about. So here, just some other ideas here. It's a good problem to solve using algorithm is one that can be automated, digitized, and not require your help once built. So this is essential, that once you give your system to the client, in theory, they should be able to use it without your help, right? If you build some kind of web page and then every time the client wants to make a change to the web page, they have to get a developer, that's not a system. Okay, that's like a static web page. It's not a system. It's just, you are doing the processing there, right? The client gives you the input. You are the system, right? You're doing the processing and you provide the output. You want something that once you have handed it over to the client, you're no longer needed. Okay, so possible systems to build. So the first one here is a CRUD application. Now, what do you mean by CRUD? That sounds kind of disgusting, you might say. Well, CRUD is an actual industry term, and it's apps that allow for, as it says here, is an application that allows you to create, read, update, and delete data. Okay, so these are used for processing any kind of data. Examples are e-commerce website, a custom build blog, anything you can imagine, any kind of interactive web page you might have, any kind of desktop app is what you might call a CRUD app. Okay, games and simulators, but you could interpret these as types of CRUD apps. Okay, and then physical computing solutions. So this involves programming robots as well as using microcomputing components to automate things. So students have used Arduino units in the past and connected them to like a pump or a sensor or both. And when the sensor does one thing, it triggers the pump, for example, and it does the thing, right? So for another example could be automated watering of a plant, right? There's a sensor that checks the moisture of soil in a plant, and when it gets below a certain point, it's programmed to automatically trigger and water the plant, right? That's just a typical example of a physical computing solution. So those are completely on the table as well. Examples. I actually have tons of examples, so I will share those with you in other resources, but I have a whole gallery of IB solutions for you to see, as well as solutions created by my own students, my own past students, that show the whole IA, right? Okay, so the first step is to find a client and then get approval, talk to them, make contact, and get a general idea of what solution they want, and you need to get your approval here for it. So find a client, get approval for the solution. Also find an advisor to help you in the design and development process. Again, this could be your supervisor, your teacher, or this could be someone else, but this is the time you find that person and declare that, okay? And then finally, then you will submit your proposal. So fill out the first part of that document, and then once you've been approved, you can move on to task 2. All right, let's go ahead and fill this part in together here. So developer, I am going to work under a pseudonym here, right? Well, actually, no, I'm going to be my own developer. So the developer's name is Mr. C, okay? The client's name, it's a teacher named Arthur Dent. Yeah, good name. Advisor is also going to be Arthur Dent. He's my computer science teacher, let's say. And the solution title is going to be, the idea here is it's going to be a club attendance checker. The idea is that when a club, a school club, wants to have a meeting, they should take attendance, and that could just be done with a piece of paper, but you forget the paper, you do all sorts of stuff. So this club advisor, Arthur Dent, would like a way to automate this, and he has some ideas, and so I'm going to talk to him about these ideas and see what I could build for him, right? So I've completed this section, and this document is available to the supervisor, and I'll submit it to the supervisor, and the supervisor, my teacher, is just going to read this first part, and I might need some follow-up, some discussion with them, explain the idea, and the supervisor is going to give a thumbs up or thumbs down to the idea. Now, just for full disclosure, what the supervisor will be looking for is whether it's suitable. Is this going to be a good project or not, right? Because it would be a pity to get started, work on it, and then determine actually it's not a very good project for the IA. So you're better off doing something else, right? Okay, so that's the point of this process. Okay, once you've gotten approved, it's time to move on to task 2, conducting the first meeting with your client. So task 2 isn't as simple as task 1. What you'll need to do is you're going to have like 3 parts to this task. One is preparing for the meeting with your client, then conducting the meeting with your client, and then after the meeting producing certain amount of documentation which you will turn into your supervisor as evidence of completing task 2. So what are the aims? The aims of this meeting are the following, right? To identify the context for which your solution is planned. What this means is getting background information about about what the client's problem is and how they are currently coping with it. You want to get as much information about this as you can so that you can consider all factors when planning your solution. Another thing you'll need to do is identify relevant stakeholders for the solution. So stakeholders are parties affected by the solution but aren't necessarily the client. So, for example, in the case that I just said, where I'm building a club attendance checker for a teacher, the teacher is the client. But who are stakeholders? Well, the stakeholders might be the club members, the people actually who are getting their attendance checked, right? They aren't the ones asking for the solution to be built, but it will affect them in some way, okay? So the idea is just very broadly identifying who the stakeholders are. And then the third aim of the meeting is to determine how you will be obtaining further requirements from the stakeholders, interview, survey, observation, or research. For the purposes of the IA, you really are going to be interviewing your client, right? But you should also think about, as you're identifying the stakeholders, think about if it's worth talking to any of them and if you should survey them, maybe observe, like if they're doing a club meeting now, stand in on a club meeting and see how the club meeting happens now, just so you get an idea of how the problem is being currently dealt with, right? And then research, and research means looking online or other places, usually online, right? Are there current solutions to this problem, right? Are there some paid apps that are out there? just look into them, see how they're built, see what they do. What are some of the considerations, right? This all falls under the pile, the kind of heading research. Okay, so those are some of the goals of the first meeting. Okay, let's talk now about preparing for the first meeting. So first thing you should do is schedule a time with your client. I'd say for the first meeting, 20 minutes minimum, 40, maybe even an hour. But it's hard to say exactly what the time you'll need. So I'd say within that range is, it could be a first short meeting. You will be having another meeting. You could have multiple meetings, follow-up meetings. But of course, be sensitive to your client's needs as well. Okay, so bring pencils and paper for notes and sketches. I highly encourage sketching, and we'll discover why. Just a moment. An audio recording device. Yes, have an audio recording device with you. Your phone is enough, and test it first. You will need to record this meeting with the client, and more on that in a bit. Finally, prepare a list of questions. Now, what kind of questions will you have to answer or ask the client? Well, here's some possible questions, right? Ask the client to describe what is the problem they're currently facing. Again, the idea is to get as much background into the problem as you can get. So some questions to ask are, how are you dealing with this problem now? Please explain in detail. What are the biggest inconveniences of the current situation? Who are the people involved, right? Who are the stakeholders involved? Maybe don't ask it directly like that, but I'm sure, if it's an adult, they'll probably know what a stakeholder is. What would the ideal solution to your problem look like? Of course, you're assuming technology, asking something like, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do, right? What features, capabilities would you like to see in the solution? So notice the conversation has changed now from describing the problem to describing what they would like as a solution. Okay, so what's the ideal solution to problem look like? What are the features and capabilities of it? List all the things. You can be very direct, say what are all the things you want it to do? And then finally, and why. Try to find out why they want it to do it, right? And describe what the features look like, and I'll sketch them out here. So if they say they would like something, have them sketch it out. Have them explain what it would look like in their opinion, okay? Then it comes time to conducting the first meeting. So be respectful of the client's time, show up on time, and finish on time. You could, of course, if you go beyond the scheduled time, you can politely ask, is it okay to keep going? And maybe the client will say, yeah, of course, no problem. Ask your questions and any follow-up questions for clarification. Record the full audio of the interview and ask for permission first, okay? You might even want to ask them for permission before the meeting even happens, not just there on the spot. Okay, you will be needing that. You will be making a transcript of that audio and including that in your IA. It's important. And then finally, using pencil and paper, sketch out any elements of the solutions that can be sketched out. So if the client describes that, well, they would imagine a screen with a button, and then you'd press the button and this would happen. Take a moment and say, okay, can we sketch that out? And so put down a piece of paper and sketch out the button would be here, and then there would be a table, and what would that table have? It would have the names of the students, okay, this, right? Get them to explain as much as they can what they imagined, and what you'll discover is actually the client might not have really ever considered what the solution would look like. So this might be hard for them because they haven't really thought it through, and this meeting and your questioning will kind of force them to think it over and clarify better. Finally, post-meeting. So after you've completed the meeting, there's a couple things you need to put together. The first thing here is evidence of consultation. Okay, this is a term listed in the IB guide, and what they want is a transcript of your audio recording. Don't include, you won't be submitting the audio recording itself to the IB, a transcript of it. Now, take the audio recording and you can go to Word. It has an online feature where you can upload an audio file and it will create a transcript for you. There's actually, just Google it and you'll find lots of kind of services that you upload an audio file and it'll develop a transcript for you. Okay, so that can be your evidence of consultation. Any sketches or notes that you produce during the meeting is also evidence of consultation. So scan it and put it into the launch document. There will be a place for it. Afterwards, you will write up a scenario overview of the client up to 250 words. This is for criterion A. And then finally, a solution features as user stories. We will discuss this very shortly, actually, but let me show you here what that looks like from the perspective of this document. Here's the first meeting with your client, and I kind of have written out what I've shared with you. After you have the meeting, I'd like you to put the date of the meeting and evidence of consultation, so the transcripts and any links to any images, just put them all right there, the links in, so save them somewhere to the cloud drive, and then put links to them here. Overview, so scenario overview. Describe who the client is, the problem they are facing, and how they are dealing with the problem currently. Also include who your advisor is, if any, and why they are an appropriate choice, okay? So you put all that information in here up to 250 words, and it says criterion A. This is something that later, when you're compiling criterion A, you're directly going to copy and paste it in. So whatever you write it well, because this will be sent off to the IB and evaluated. Finally, user stories. So create as many user stories as you can to define the needs of the clients and about the format of user stories. So I'm going to go over this just in a second. I have slides about it. So what are user stories? So a user story is a short and simple description of a feature told from the perspective of the person who desires the new capability, usually a user or customer of the system. User stories typically follow a simple template. As a such and such type of user, so as a user, as an administrator, as a customer, I want, and then you put out what is the desired feature or functionality, so that, and you give the reason behind doing it. We'll be using, I'm going to continue here, reading here. We'll be using user stories at this point in the IA process to keep the focus on the problem the client needs solved, rather than jumping to what a solution will look like. Later on in the process, we'll be using simpler ways of recording requirements, so the project requirements. So once you do that, part one will be complete. Okay. Now I'm going to pause now and fill this out myself so you get an idea of what a completed part one looks like. Okay. So I'm going to walk through some of the post-meeting documentation now. I've simulated having that meeting, and I want to show you now what that post-meeting documentation looks like. So again, just to recap, we need evidence of consultation, we need scenario overview, and we need user stories. So let's go through those ideas right now. Here is, we completed this section here first of all, and now we have the evidence of consultation. So I have here just a unlinked, but it says link to a transcript. I'm going to show that in a second, and link to sketches. So I had a meeting with the client, and we came up with some of these resources here. First, I'm going to read the scenario overview, because then my sketches will make a lot more sense. So here it is. The word count on this is 178. So up to 250, 175 minimum. Yeah, sure. Good enough, let's say. I guess I just had trouble writing more. Perhaps you will be able to write more. Mr. Dent is the advisor for the astronomy club and would like an easy way to take attendance, as required by the student government. This is usually achieved by passing around a piece of paper and having everyone sign it. After that, the names need to be transferred to some other document where they are available to the student government if they'd like to inspect it. This isn't the most efficient way, as sometimes names might not get transferred in a timely manner, or the paper might get lost altogether. This creates an extra administrative burden for Mr. Dent and the club officials who also assist with the task. Other clubs on campus use a system that involves scanning QR codes and completing a Google form, which sounds very sensible, but certain things need to be done manually there as well. My advisor, okay, so I could write a bit more about the background. I could write about, maybe I talked to some students, maybe I talked to the student government, what's required there, right? Let's assume I could write more there again, right? Looking at different stakeholders, talking to them, and putting them into this. This is all very appropriate. My advisor for this project will be my teacher, Mr. Dent, as he's very knowledgeable about programming and computers, and will certainly be a valuable resource for guiding me through the technical aspects of this project. So that hits the minimum word count. Please aim for the 270, 250, but here you get an idea of what the solution overview looks like. Note that there's not really any, scenario overview, sorry. There's not any mention of what the solution will look like, except for mention of what other people are doing to solve the problem, right? I haven't touched upon that. So this is the scenario we're looking at, and during the interview, let's say I asked Mr. Dent to sketch out some things with me, and let's take a look at them now. I just kind of did it on my iPad and transferred it over here. You can just use pen and paper, scan it, or use an iPad as well. That's fine. Please do this though, and please do it by hand so it shows that your project idea is evolving. They like that, they'll give you points for that. Here is a sketch, and down here's a brief caption description of the sketch. Sketch of main screen showing start, stop buttons. Here's the start button, here's the stop button. Names of students, so here's those students' names as they register, and the date of the meeting. The date is here. So the idea is students would scan the QR code, and as they scanned it, the students' names would appear. The next idea here, this is the report for the student government. Sketch of report for student government listing the dates of all the meetings as well as which students attended. So it's a pretty straightforward idea. Here's just student government report. Here's the date of the meeting and everyone who attended, and then the next meeting date and everyone who attended. That's it. Maybe they're going to want things like grades, the grades of the students. You know, Joey is a 12th grader while Sonia is a 10th grader, for example, right? Okay, and then the last element here is another report, sketch of member engagement report, which shows a table of which members have been attending meeting and which days they've missed. So here's a name, and down this column here is the names of the members, and then the meeting. So it's meeting 1, 2, could be the meeting date as well. And if it's a check mark, they came on that day, and if it's an X, they were absent that day. Maybe more statistics could be added, you know, summary of like percentage of meetings attended, something like that. But all in all, this is just a real rough draft of it, right? And that's the idea with this. Nothing big, nothing finished, keep it rough, first iteration of this product. Okay, and that's it. Okay, and that is linked here, right? It leads to, so again, nothing too crazy with those sketches, and you can see here, this is a link that leads to these sketches, to the document we were just looking at. And this document is located in the same folder as this document. Please do that. Please, as you produce all this documentation, keep it in the same folder, because your instinct is going to be to just create a new file, and that will create a file in your root directory, usually if you're doing Google. And you might have hundreds of files in there. How are you going to find, and you'll call this one sketches. How are you going to find it? Keep it all in the same folder and link it through like that. This last bit here, linked to transcript, I wanted to walk through that process with you briefly on how it looks in Word. So Word Online has a functionality here, you can kind of see it, where, oh, let me get rid of myself here. And it has a little microphone here where you can dictate or transcribe. If you click transcribe, it'll ask you to upload a file. I've already uploaded it, and it's gone through the process of putting in speaker 1, speaker 2, this kind of stuff, and then you have a blank document, and you click here to add and just the text with timestamps, speakers. I'm going to put just the text, and it's going to populate the whole text for me there. Okay. I will say it is not sufficient for you to just include this, right? You will need to clean this up a little bit. So every time a new speaker begins speaking, you put in speaker, this will be Mr. C, right? And then, yes, my name is Mr. Dent. I was, for recording this, I was actually I was playing both the roles, so there's Mr. Dent. So it identifies me as speaker 1 the whole way because it tells it's the same voice, right? Ideally, when you're doing this, it will be able to differentiate between speaker 1 and speaker 2. It's okay for you to condense this down, get rid of ums and ahs, but clean it up, make it look acceptable, and edit it, okay? Just don't paste it in and say, yeah, great, I'm done. No. This needs to look nice because this evidence of consultation you will be forwarding on over to the IB. Where it is, I'm going to click who to share this with, copy. I'm going to copy this shareable link, and then the shareable link, I'm going to go ahead and right click. I think I can insert the link, just insert it like that, and now there it is. That's really all I'm looking for this. So that's the first part of this. Finally, the user stories. I'm going to go through the different user stories with you, and I hope you can recognize the advantage of putting them this way, right? So the first one, remember, we start with as a, and then the role, the type of person, and then I want, and you want something, and then for some reason. So here we go. As a teacher, I want to start and finish taking attendance quickly so that we can begin our meetings as soon as possible, right? That's one of the concerns the client has, is that they have to take attendance, and instead of just letting the meeting start, they're passing around a piece of paper, then the meeting, and then they have to keep track of it. It's a whole thing. This way, one and done, and you move on to the meeting. That's one of the requirements the client has, right? Next, from the perspective of the student. Now, I haven't theoretically, as the developer, I haven't spoken to any students, but from the perspective of, from what I learned from the client, this is something that they want for the students to have. So it's just a requirement, and it's the question is, whose perspective is it from? It's not that a student told me they wanted this, but it's something the teacher wants, but it's something that benefits the student. So here it is. As a student, I want to take attendance with my phone quickly so that we can start our meetings quickly. Maybe change my wording there, but you get the idea. Quickness. Students always have their phones with them, so it's a very easy and useful thing. Clearly, the client is enamored with this idea of the QR code, and although we aren't 100% committed to it, right? Because 100% committed would be the requirement of software must display QR code. There's no mention of a QR code, but we do mention that we want them to be able to use their phones to take attendance. So we're not locking ourselves into that feature yet. Instead, what we're doing is we're still thinking about the problem in the problem space rather than the solution space, if I can word it that way. Next one, as a student, I want to know in real time if my attendance has been recorded. You filled out the form, you need feedback as a student. Did my attendance go through? And you saw in the sketches there were the names of, and those names the idea is that those names will appear as students fill in their attendance, okay? So notice I didn't put the so that. It's not always necessary. I could write them in, but these user stories were not going to be sending to the IB. So, make them as useful for you as you can, right? And you'll find yourself ideally coming back to them throughout the process to really understanding what was the intention of the feature, right? Why does a feature exist? Hopefully this user story will give you an understanding of that. Next, as a member of student government, I want to know what the attendance for the club has been. Okay, that's what the student government is all about, apparently, in this case. They want to keep track of that. You could even go and talk to a member of student government and find out what specific information they want, but maybe at a later time, not for this initial meeting, right? Finally, as a club officer, I want to know which members of the club are engaged and attending meetings regularly, right? And that was the member engagement sketch with the table of who's attended and who's not. Once you've completed all this, I am happy to say you will have finished with part 1 of the process, and we will be moving on to part 2, which is prototyping, designing and getting, building a prototype so you could design and get fast feedback on what you've created.